All right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to the ACLC webinar, Workgroups in 2018 from Concept to Action. We're glad you could be with us. Today, we're going to be looking at workgroups and how things are changing in the 2018 year. And I'm happy to have our Executive Director, John Pullman, with me this morning.
Thanks, Tom.
Our agenda is as follows. If I can get the slide. Well, you know who we are. So you know John Pullman. More than you know myself, I'm the research manager, and we'll be working more closely with you in the year to come, which I'm really excited about. Our agenda this morning will start off with John Pullman, who will take a moment to introduce the ACLC to remind you of the purpose and value of membership. Some of you have been here now almost all 3 years with us, and we welcome you back. We're really excited. It's so awesome to have that kind of longevity, but a bunch of you are new, and so we wanted to give you a quick introduction before we dive deeply into the work plan for 2018, which is our second item. We want to understand the objectives of the 2018 work plan. So thirdly, you can determine your involvement. So we'll take a look at the different ways you can participate. And then fourth, we'd like you to come away with clear next steps for your participation. So we'll wrap up with that. So before I hand it over to John, I'll just remind you that we are on a webinar. For those of you who are on the phone, we will be sending out a recording in addition to this presentation. But for those who can connect to the computer, please do, so you can follow along and see what we're talking about. Questions, please submit them via the Q&A box in your Zoom module as we go along. We're going to reserve the last little bit for your questions. We have set aside an hour for this presentation. We've been doing it in 35 minutes. So if you can stay with us at least 35 minutes and then a little longer, depending on the questions you have, we will try and be as efficient as possible. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thanks, Tom. You forgot to mention how exciting the sort of ESPN approach is to this. We felt it seems to engage more people. We feel a little ridiculous about it, but we're having a good time. So let us know. You can put a question there of, you know, why in the world are you doing this? And we'd like to respond to that as well.
It is primarily for audio. These give you way better audio. That's for you guys.
Fair enough. Great. Tom mentioned there are a few of you that are new. Those who are getting more engaged in the ACLC this next year, we're excited to have you. Just as far as our mission, we are a mission-oriented organization with brings a lot of benefit for the industry as well as for individual members. The mission that we have is to accelerate the readiness of healthcare organizations in these value-based models, really in this new wave of work. We often give a skiing analogy. I'm actually a skier, grew up doing such. And if you think about in this transition to care delivery reform, you have a payment ski, and that's the different models we're addressing, bundled payments and ACOs and like different contracts. But you also have this care delivery ski, which needs to advance at the same time, without which, when we've seen this, a number of organizations just not bringing that change to their organization as quickly as they are jumping into these payment models. So our objective is to really help with the care delivery transition. So we talk about what providers need to do, when they need to do it, and you can see this in the atlas that Tom will talk about in a minute, and ideas for how they can implement. And that's really the focus on 2018, is getting to that. How do you implement these competencies in real world situations? The ACLC, the way we do this, we do not bring all the expertise. We believe the expertise and knowledge about how to succeed is out there in the industry. So with 70+ organizations representing the full spectrum of representatives throughout the healthcare community, everyone they send their representatives. We're here to learn, but we're here to share, and we collect that knowledge within the ACLC at the center, and then package that up in ways that it can be easily used in the industry for their own transformation. We're grateful for all the members we have. We have a lot of new members coming in at the beginning of the year, particularly a lot of providers, and we're excited about what will come from that. The last thing I just want to say is on the goals we have for you, the experience. We have this overarching objective to help the entire industry. A lot of this content goes out publicly. There are things that restrict to members And some of those are for providers. We want to help, particularly the providers among the members. We advance their success in a lot of different ways. One, the new way is this value-based readiness assessment, which each provider organization, a member of the ACLC now has access to see where they are. It leverages the competencies that have been developed by the members of the past year and allows us to identify areas of focus in which we can have really to help these providers move forward. We also have the case study briefs. Tom's going to mention those here in a minute. The other element that we have within membership is to connect the community. We really believe no one can live in a silo anymore, and we are here to do introductions. We're here through work groups and through our in-person member meetings for you to interact and get to know each other, and we hope you take advantage of all those opportunities. If you'd like an introduction with someone else in the organization, we're happy to personally do that. And then the third thing is track the transition. The logo behind us of Leva Partners, it's the best backdrop we have here in the office. The ACLC is managed by Leva Partners, which is a healthcare intelligence firm, and brings a lot of assets into understanding how healthcare is transitioning, the pace of transition. That really informs our ability and our work, but also gives us the ability to share with you products through intelligence, through our news, through the briefs we put out, and the Torch Insight access you will have, which is a product which you can see to visualize the transition in value-based care. And if you don't have an account or need any of that, you can email us. Jacqueline Critchlow on our team can help you with that. The last thing before I turn it back to Tom is the word work. Everyone has a lot of work to do, and extracurricular activities that are donating time for the public good are nice, but it's not core to your mission. We actually feel the work we are doing, while it says work groups, are really to help you in your jobs, to help you in your strategic decision making. And we have numerous testimonials. I think a lot of you can confirm that that you get more out of the ACLC than you give in. So we encourage you to come learn, take that back to your organizations, make better strategic decisions. But there is the nice element of this work is that we are working to help advance the industry as a whole, and we're excited about the opportunities we do. Tom, I'm going to slip out of a camera view since I'm become mostly irrelevant for the rest of the webinar, but happy to also answer questions along the way or at the end.
Okay. Thank you, John. All right, so let's move on. And I'm going to transition with a photo of the last member meeting we had. I believe it was in DC. Is that where we were? I think we were in DC. Bit of a whirlwind. But I love this photo. I come in every day to the office. Daniel Chipping, someone with whom you guys are all very familiar since he ran the work groups last year. He has this on his desktop. I love seeing it. It's a reminder of how far we've come. For those of you who are not familiar, this is the Atlas. It's the culmination of 2 years worth of work, right? And I wanted to bring up this photo because I want to employ an analogy to describe what the work that we will be doing in 2018. So often when we talk about delivery reform, and we use phrases like changing landscape, and I think it's very apt phraseology, partially because we have this idea that we are at a place and we are going to a place, and this idea of changing landscape makes a lot of sense when you have to account for that in your journey. And when it comes to delivery reform, this is very appropriate because, you know, imagine we are somewhere on the East Coast. That's that little yellow circle for you, for all you looking at the screen. And Oregon, Astoria, Oregon is our destination. I chose that because that's where actually I went with my family this summer, our summer vacation. And so just imagine that that is our destination. What we did in the very first year at the ACLC is we recognized that for providers, this is a journey, right? And that, but however, that it's not just a straight line kind of a journey. It's more like the journey that I took my children on this summer, where we had multiple must-see cities. And so it's sort of like, it's not just about getting from A to Z, but about developing along the way. There were certain things I wanted my children to see on our family vacation, and such is the case with provider organization development. What we did in the first year was we identified over 1,000 competencies between our 7 work groups And we took the year to whittle, refine, combine, sometimes break apart those competencies down to a core 160. And the way you can think of those 160 competencies are basically the must-see destinations, right? So this is not a very practical family vacation, especially if the kids are under the age of 8. But you can imagine if this is your dream vacation, you want to hit, these are your must-see destinations driving across the US. What we did in the following year, 2017, the year that we're wrapping up now, is we said, what is the likely sequence, the sequence that makes the most sense in terms of implementation now that we have all these competencies? So we took those 160 competencies and we tried to understand where they lie in relation to each other in terms of implementation. And so it's like we took that original list of must-see cities and we essentially created a path. For a lot of the year, we called this end product, if you will, we called it a glide path. We ended up renaming it to the Atlas because we think that makes a lot more sense, all things considered. And hopefully by the end of this really drawn out analogy, you'll agree that the Atlas makes a lot more sense as well. So, but like a family vacation where you're hitting these must-see destinations, as a provider organization, you are moving from must-develop competency to another. Like a family vacation, the interstates between these competencies are pretty easy. Once you've been through one city, you kind of understand, okay, now we're going to the next one. However, if any of you who have been on road trips, you know, when you get to a city, because of the population and the development and oftentimes the geography, those elements combine to create a very, very complex landscape. Such it is with competencies as well. So the products that have been built by the work group members to date have been awesome resources for strategy teams, people thinking at a very high level how to organize a large organization and to position teams to effectively work together. What we've consistently heard from providers is that we need to go deeper. So to further the analogy, when you get to a city, those elements that I mentioned that can make it really complex can leave you with a city like this. This is a random city guide that I found online. I think it's a city from Scandinavia somewhere, but as you can see, this particular geography is quite complex. You have some islands and isthmus and a lot of roads and probably a lot of buildings, and that's just what happens when you have population growth. But however, we are all familiar with maps, and more specifically in this case scenario, a city guide, something that's able to help you easily identify elements that regardless of what city, you know that a thicker road means a road that you can probably drive faster on. If it's a dotted road, you're going to be driving slow. It's probably off-road or a dirt road. So you can sort of navigate and also see some of these main attractions or just main places to go see. So the way this analogy carries over to our 2018 work is what we essentially want to do for the competencies is create a city guide for competencies, something that once you get to that competency, it allows you to go deeper, but not in a way that you get totally lost. So the phrase that we're using is competency guide, sort of like a city guide. So once you get to a competency, how do you orient yourself in terms of that development? So I want to answer two questions in just the next couple minutes. One, what would a competency guide look like? And two, why would it be helpful? So for those of you who were with us last year, you'll be very familiar with the case study briefs that we initiated last year. It was a big initiative. It's a growing library. Our intent is to have 3 competency guides, three case study briefs for each competency. What a case study brief is a 2-page document that summarizes one provider's experience implementing one competency, And the goal of that, or the objective behind that, is that you could see what these competencies look like in real life, also what they would look like from, for example, the standpoint of a physician group. We know that a particular HIT competency as implemented by a physician group will be very different than that of a standalone hospital or an integrated delivery network. So our goal is to build a library where for each competency you have those case study briefs from each viewpoint, right? But they are case studies, which means that there are, market particulars that only applied there. There's a certain provider history that influenced the way that they did things. Really, our goal with the competency guides is to extract from all this research that we're doing across the industry and pull out principles and considerations that regardless of who you are, these are things that you should have in mind when you are in the planning phase for implementation, but also the implementation phase. So we are also thinking that these documents also need to be very short and concise. So like the case study briefs, we recognize that executives and also frontline clinicians, you don't have time to read a 20-page case study. Maybe you will at some point, but when you're just sort of in the strategy point and you're sort of considering what is our next project, we think a 2-page document makes the most sense. So like the case study briefs, they'll have sort of these uniform sections, obviously something like an introduction. We have some vague sense at this point of what could be that essential information. Some of the things we've brainstormed are, what are the principles for planning and implementing these competencies? What are some of the considerations, maybe from a market standpoint or from a provider ability standpoint for both the planning and implementation phase of things? So hopefully documents that can engage people at various levels of the organization, especially with things like indicators. Across the industry, what are some of the things that we are seeing are being used as metrics for this particular competency? And then obviously as the work groups, with the multi-stakeholder makeup of the work groups, we have had access to just a great amount of resource. We want the work groups to act as curators so that the most appropriate and most powerful resources can be found in these documents for further exploration. And then I have this last little box here on the bottom right that's other. We, just like everything that has been done in the past 2 years, in our first 2 years, we know that we will see change based on feedback from our work group chairs and from our work group participants. And we look forward to that. And we wanted to just give you a preview so you can already be thinking. So we hope that our first work group kickoff meeting is full of feedback and that we completely change the way we're doing things, all for your benefit. But before we move on, we just want to address a few things. Why is this needed in from our position? Providers, both within the membership and the ones that we are interacting with from a research standpoint on a daily basis throughout the industry, are asking for more detail and more direction on a lot of these competencies. We feel that there's a great opportunity for clarity on what competencies need to be developed through uniformity. So we're very big on uniform, concise documents that really serve as resources for the provider community and for the non-provider community who are seeking very diligently to serve this community, many of which we find among our membership, and we love having you with us. Third, we think there's also an opportunity as this sort of, the uniformity and familiarity enhances the distribution of these resources for the betterment of the industry. There's an opportunity, we think, for the industry to come to an agreement, to really come to a consensus around what is the work that needs to be done, as John said, on the provider ski, so that we can continue down the mountain as we should be in line with payment model development. We think there's other benefits that will come out of this that we haven't even considered. So we invite you to join us in working through that. From an individual and organizational standpoint, we want to persuade you that this will be a fantastic year. Number one, because you will be learning from providers. We're going to talk in just a moment about how we've changed up the work groups in a way that has providers more front and center in their conversations, in their concerns, so that everyone involved can learn from these conversations. So we also think that there's a big opportunity here that as we are developing the methodology for building these competency guides, we can then take that process and the work group format and in the next year, go to industry and say, if you have a stake in shaping how this particular line of work should be developed, and you can prove that you can add some thought leadership to this, take this and help us magnify our efforts to where we want to build these competency guides for all 160 competencies. Third, as John mentioned, connecting the community. We think that you will build some very strong relationships in an environment of meaningful work. We've seen this in the past 2 years, and with the new work group format and some other things that we have going on, the VBRA work, the value-based readiness assessment work that John mentioned, we think that this is going to be some very meaningful work because, point 4, we want to change the world, and we're only doing our little part, but we think it's needed. All right, so how do you eat an elephant? I've been talking about building competency guides for all 160 competencies. For those of you who haven't seen this atlas before, it's an impressive image. It's also in some ways an impractical image because there's so much information on this that just to zoom it down for you to see in one visual, you can't read any of that text. As you saw in the beginning part of our webinar, to make this text legible, we had to print it off on a 4 by 10 foot vinyl poster that we then had everyone sign. It's hanging in our office. Please come to our office and sign if you haven't signed. But anyway, this is the document. But the question that may be in your minds is, with 160 competencies, how in the world are we going to start building these competency guides? They take time. They do represent a deeper dive, and they deserve attention so that they are quality and could be a true resource. The strategy for the 2018 year is as follows. We need to break this up, and we need to essentially do the exercise before we can scale this up. What we want to ask of the work groups, which have recently moved from 7 down to 4, the 4 that you can see here on your left, governance, finance, care delivery, and health IT, we want each work group together with their chairs to come up with a criteria to select a subset of competencies to develop this year. And we want you to pick 3. So for example, governance, they have 16. We need you to pick 3. Perhaps it's the first 3, perhaps it's the last 3, perhaps it's something in between like I've done here, but just illustratively. But we want each work group to go through and do that. Our goal then for the following year, for the 2019 year, will be to take the methodology that we are developing as work groups and to go to the industry and say, help us round this out. We'll discuss that more later. For the sake of today's webinar, we needed to, and for the sake of the 2018 calendar, we need this to be a manageable and meaningful amount of work, and we think we've struck the right balance, and we hope that you'll agree. So moving on to your specific involvement. So there are 3 ways to think about it, 3 levels of participation. First, we will have work group provider chairs. This is a change from last year. Last year, we had national experts serve as our chairs, and they were great. We love them. In fact, a lot of them have agreed to continue working with us on a voluntary basis, and we love that they are so dedicated to the work that they will continue to be a support. But we heard loud and clearly that we want to hear more from providers that are doing this work, and so we've allowed for each work group to choose up to 3 provider chairs, ideally from those 3 different provider configurations I've alluded to earlier: physician groups, hospitals, and integrated delivery networks. And those invitations are out. Some of you have invitations to your provider organizations, and we're looking forward to hearing back from you. Those invitations went out based on at least 2 different criteria. One is organizations that have expertise in the work area. Obviously, those are the organizations that we will most benefit from hearing from because they have done this work and can give counsel to their fellow providers in the chairs and also in the work groups. However, we also felt like there was an important aspect to just having providers that maybe were still in the midst of doing all this work, but were very passionate, interested. And we felt like combining those kind of provider organizations in the leadership, in the provider leadership of the work groups was important. So we think we're going to have a great mix in that regard. Now, in terms of the actual work group participants, we split it up into 2 categories. The reality is these categories already existed organically. Sort of, if you can think of the work group members as the 10 to 15 to 20 or so that came to every monthly meeting ready with questions. They have projects at home. they are working in either the planning or implementation phase of these competencies. As opposed to, for example, workgroup observers who have projects maybe on the horizon. They're considering deeper workgroup participation, but aren't sure just yet, or are potentially just curious and wanted to visit a workgroup. We often had more of those on the workgroup calls. And so what we thought was, let's create a bit of a designation. Jacqueline has reached out to most of you and has made either a temporary or sort of a preliminary designation saying, based on your experience last year where you put most of your time, we think you'll most be interested in this work group, or based on your title, or we want to leave that open to you as well, that maybe your role has changed in your organization or you are new. Please let us know where you want to be. We also will give you the opportunity to let us know at what level you'd like to be involved. For example, you could be involved. The details for this policy will be in that email, but you could, an organization could be involved. For example, you could be involved in one particular work group, right, at a very deep level. However, it is open to you to be an observer on the 3 other work groups. So really there is no limit to work group observers, although we do limit the amount of work group members a particular organization could have. And the reason we do that is simple. We can't let these groups get too unwieldy, then the conversation is sort of self-defeating. We need these conversations to be intimate, substantive, and practical, and we think it'll be a better experience for all if we can kind of, create these categories. The one thing I'll say about work group observers before I move on is that this, I think, will represent a lot of the participation this year. It's a very valid way to participate, and there will be plenty of opportunities that even if you kind of feel like you just want to observe quietly, we still want you to know that there will be opportunities to send in questions via email or text, and we want to always address those questions. And we will definitely be looking for you for document review and approval. We want your names on these documents, and we want you to feel comfortable about the quality. And so we will continue to engage you as much as we can. So with just a few minutes left, I want to quickly review the general sort of methodological approach for the work that's going to be done in the 2018 year. And I'll just include a quick caveat with this. This is all subject to change. This is our draft methodology, and we hope that you will help us improve it. The first step is that the workgroup chairs, which we are in the midst of selecting at this moment, and the workgroup participants, both members and observers, will work together to choose a subset of competencies for competency guide development in the year to come. That will be 3 different competencies. The chairs and the ACLC staff, being myself, Dan Chipping, John Pullman, and others, will develop some draft elements for your review, you being workgroup members and observers, and we will want your feedback, so that'll be the next step. After that, we anticipate that from that conversation, we will come away with a determination that there are additional research needs. We want to commission case study briefs based off those needs so that the case study briefs that are being developed alongside these competency guides can inform the discussions, right? So we are actively talking with providers who are in the midst of implementing this competency or have recently done it, so that those competency guide discussions are not abstract, they are incredibly practical, and all our providers come away with something to take home at the end of each one of those meetings for their daily jobs. After that conversation, the ACLC staff will conduct those case study brief interviews. We will distill those interview notes from so that they can inform the workgroup discussions. We will then come back to the workgroup, who will then approve the second draft, make additional assignments if necessary. We may invite those case study brief subjects to join our workgroup discussion so that you, workgroup participants, can have Q&A with them before we give a final pass on that competency guide. And then finally, we're particularly excited about this opportunity. We think that there will be a lot of excitement around these resources and around the work that's being done, even outside the work group. So once a trimester, if you will, a 4-month work period, we want to take these draft documents and some of the thinking that's been sort of developed alongside them and present that to the broader ACLC. So even your colleagues that have been involved in other work groups can at least in 1 hour get the summary of the work that you've been doing and the resources that are coming their way. We also want to make these once a trimester or 3 times yearly webinars available to the public, so we can have some opportunity for public input and comment, but also for them to see, some of the work that your organization is doing and highlight those of you who are involved. However, those documents we anticipate will only be circulated, those draft documents will only be circulated within the ACLC, but they can be resources for you as we're developing them. The rest of the public will have to wait until final publication in the spring of next year. So to round out today's presentation, as I mentioned earlier, email with tentative workgroup assignments have been sent out. Please respond. So Jacqueline will follow up, and as many of you know, she is relentless, and for good reason. We want to have you involved, and we're not going to let you go. Third, those chair nominations are out, and those of you who have been nominated, we encourage you to respond so we can get going and kick off that work, which will commence in January. A lot of these dates are a bit up in the air, but we will have a kickoff in January, and we hope that you will sort of mentally prepare for that. And we want to put out some dates soon so that you can block off your calendar, not only for January, but ideally for the rest of the year. We are hoping that, similar to last year's schedule, we can sort of set aside, like the first Tuesday of every month. You know when it's going to be. Sometimes that makes it hard because we can't be flexible, but it also makes it so you can plan 12 months out, and we think that's a benefit. So let's check in and see if we have any questions at this point. I'm not seeing any head nods. So we have been so completely thorough in our explanation of what the work groups are going to do next year that there are absolutely no questions. Let me give you a minute to think about that. Also, I'll let you know that feel free to follow up with questions. I think we have one, so let me take it. So the question is, should everyone that was involved with one of the work groups last year have received an assignment email? I think the answer is yes. Jacqueline, is that right? Or did they only go to points of contact first and after? Question. So I think the more concise answer is, because there are so many of you on an individual basis, we have created essentially our main points of contact for each of your organizations, and we sent that email to that person. So ideally, it will have come from Jacqueline, and ideally what it had was, or not ideally, it did. It had a chart with the previous 7 work groups, a column with your organization's individuals that were involved in those work groups, and then a bit of a conversion that shows the new 4 work groups with the tentative assignment. So, John, do you have a comment on what we should do if that email hasn't made it around their entire organization yet?
I think it's just talk to your point of contact, or you can email really any of us, even respond to the ACLC Weekly News, and we'll put that together.
Yeah, so it wouldn't surprise us if your point of contact is quite busy. Please reach out to us directly, and we'll get you your tentative assignment and discuss if another work group assignment makes sense. So, great question, John.
Hey, I'll add one. Art, you asked about how our organization interfaces with the Healthcare Payment Learning and Action Network, and some of you might be familiar with this organization. It's something CMS has sponsored. It's been around for a couple years, and I think the role and influence that's changed has evolved a little bit and even continues to. We do, fortunately, have a great relationship with the LAN, and we've often described ourselves as the other side of the coin of what they are doing. They're focused on the different payment models, where we focused on care delivery. We also have the luxury of our co-chair, Mark McClellan, being the co-chair of the Healthcare Payment Learning and Action Network. And that's proved really advantageous as we've talked about different projects. We've actually helped them design some of their work, and they've been helping us think through ours as well. So we continue to make that coordination, and they're happy to communicate anything through that too, and take observations. So, but great question. I don't see any others.
All right, so what we'll do real quickly is I will preview for you, those of you who are about to get this presentation, that in the appendix is a more detailed view of what the trimester, I put semester here, it should say trimester, what the trimester schedule looks like, the nature of some of the work that'll be done on each work group call, and then a bit of a glance at a year to see how this work will pan out. A much more detailed calendar is coming in the next few weeks, but for those of you who are intrigued to see how the methodology looks on a timeline, you can check that out in the appendix. So with that, without any questions, we will end and say thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having all of you participate in the year to come. So happy holidays, happy New Year.
Thanks, Tom.
See you guys.